Hey everybody, this is Neil Pasricha, and welcome back to another chapter of 3 books. We are on an epic quest to uncover the 1,000 most formative books in the world, releasing a new chapter on the exact minute of every single full moon and new moon for the next 15 years. Yes, we started all the way back in March 31st of 2018, and this show does not end until September 1st, 2031. It is a wild, weird, and crazy show. Not just because we publish on the lunar calendar, interviewing 333 of the world's most inspiring people and getting them to tell us and talk to us about their 3 most formative books, but also because we've got no ads, no sponsors, no interruptions, no commercials. We think books shouldn't have ads and interruptions, and we think book podcasts shouldn't either. We want this to be an intimate and artistic project that really is about legacy. You know, I want to look back on this project at the end of my life and feel proud. I don't want to listen to old underwear ads and things about mail order strawberries. I don't care about that stuff. This is going to be a pure piece of art and an ad-free experience for all of us, including me, because I don't want to read them. Okay. The other thing we're doing differently is we're publishing every single chapter of the show live and in person, meaning I carry around my little sort of black bag with my 2 microphones, my wires, my Zoom recorder, my headphones, and I take it to Vancouver to interview Chip Wilson, who founded Lululemon. I carry it with me to Key West, Florida, where I sit down with Judy Bloom. I take it with me into the back of Vishwas Agrawal's Uber, or to Seth Godin's studio in Hastings-on-Hudson. So there's like a sense of place in the show that's really important to me, and I hope that comes through in the recordings. And finally, what else is interesting about the show is we're doing this weird thing where we're sort of recording every single chapter in a 2-ear format. So I'm in one ear, the guest is in the other, and if you're listening to it in headphones or in your car, you should feel like you're in the middle, the literal middle, the physical middle of that conversation. I like to think of it that way. When I sit down with guests, I kind of try to have an empty chair beside me or space on the couch, because I think of this as an interactive dialogue. That's why this show has a phone number, 1-833-READ-A-LOT, where I've been receiving your calls all year. It's why we have our email addresses public on 3books.co. You can email me directly at neil@globalhappiness.org, and I love to read and respond to your messages. I want it to be interactive. I want it to be shared. I want it to be a fun experience. That's why we have a secret club that I'm not going to talk about, but as you listen to the show, you can discover like little clues to joining this secret analog-only club that's part of the show. And I think this is partly why, this is big news, people. I got big news before we start in here. It's partly why Apple Podcasts, the sort of king of the podcast community today, just placed a crown on all of our heads. They just labeled, designated, propped us up on the pedestal of this tiny curated list called the Apple Best of 2018 podcasts. It's amazing. Like, millions of podcasts are out there and millions more are coming. And we're in this little group of like 15 to 20 podcasts that have been curated by Apple to sort of mark and signify what they call the best podcasts in 2018. It is a huge mark of achievement and accomplishment for all of us. And I think a sign that we're really onto something, that these missions and goals and values that we have of quitting more to read more, of remembering that you are what you eat and you are what you read, of remembering that, books don't have ads and book podcasts shouldn't have ads, and all these little, no book guilt and no book shame. And if you want to know all our values, you can just go to 3books.co/values and read them all. But really, it's all about, if I zoom up a level, it's about living intentionally. Living the life that, as George R. Martin wrote, is full of 1,000 lives, right? A reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies. The man who never reads lives only one. And with that magical quote in mind, I thought, what better time than 11:59 p.m. on December 31st, 2018 to release this chapter, this special chapter, this best of chapter, this greatest hits chapter, this reflection back on the year that was. And hopefully with some motivation and some inspiration for all of us to think about how we want to face and challenge and grow in the year ahead, being 2019. I plan to do a chapter just like this on December 31st, 11:59 p.m. of every single one of the 15 years of the show. December 31st, 11:59 p.m., 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023. Unless anything happens, that's my goal and that's my aim. And even though this show took us so many hours to put together, because we listened to every single chapter over and over and over again until we found what we thought was the sort of 2 or 3 best minutes from every single show. So there's 2 ways to kind of consume this one. First of all, I'd like to welcome you into this. If you're if you're kind of new to the show, you're like, what is this 3 books thing? You know, I'm a few minutes into it already. There's a really long theme song. Why is it so long? And by the way, that's because I want to center and ground us before we begin. I don't want some sort of 10-second jingle in the sort of alarmist, alert-based society we live in. I want something that just sort of helps us meditate and take a breath. Give us a pause. Give us a sense of place. That's why that music and jingle, by the way, begins with like the analog play and record buttons pressing together, as you might have heard. So you're in this as a first timer. And if you're a first timer, I want you to think of this show as a bit of like a plate going up and down the all-you-can-eat buffet. You know, you're putting on a piece of soya-soaked broccoli, a little paneer, a tiny little mini quiche, a little piece of dessert. You're going back to your table. You're like, is this any good? Maybe you'll like the plate. Maybe you won't. And I really want to just say thank you for giving us a shot, okay? Because this show is the only show in the world by and for book lovers, writers, makers, sellers, and librarians. And we celebrate the love of reading and the love of good books. We think there's almost nothing in the world more important than reading good books because it lets us live more lives, right? And we only got 30,000 days here, so we want to make them count. The other way to do this show is if you're like me and you've listened to them all already. So you are a completist, a maximizer. You've been on the path. You're maybe part of the end of the podcast club. Or you're just like, hey, I listened to all these shows already. Give me the little summary, the little reflective tissue that I can lean into orally before I jump into the year ahead. And that's the boat I'm in because I've been listening to and being part of all the ones already. And for those of us like that, I want you to know I tried to pick out the nuggets that were not just the most inspiring pieces, but also the ones that were the most reflective. Okay, so because as we transition, do this pivot from year to year, 2018 to 2019, I think that inspiration is really a big part of it. And so with that all set, with you having a little understanding of the show if you're new and a little welcome back if you're not, let's jump all the way back to March 31st, 2018, in the basement of my house after my wife Leslie put the kids to bed, when I sat down with her, set up a recorder, and told her I wanted to launch a podcast. With her big brain and very, very good questioning, we were able to straighten out and formulate a plan of what 3 books was going to be and going to become. So let's go back to the basement now. I feel like reading is not threatened, but like we're all staring at screens so much.
Endangered.
It's not endangered because it's not going down, but it's.
Isn't there a list for like potential endangered species?
Yeah.
Threatened
and endangered. Okay, so it's on the line. But I just mean like I talk to people and they're like, I don't read. I don't have time. I look at my screen. I look at my.
You said that when I met you.
That's what I know. And
I remember thinking it was such a contradiction that you always told these stories of like your mom taking you to the library and you loving, reading being such a huge part of your childhood. And then you were writing your blog and you were like, oh no, I don't read. I don't have time to read. Who reads? And I was like, Neil, books are the best thing. It's the best way to relax and to get into bed and read a good book. Like there's nothing better. And you're like, no, I don't have time for that. I don't read.
I totally like that. That is and was me for a big part of it. I think going to college and university, sucked out of me the joy of reading because I was reading stuff I didn't like, but also I couldn't concentrate on books. I didn't have the attention span for them. I found them slow and boring and like I want a punchline in 500 words. Like I got used to reading articles on harvardbusinessreview.org and on the New York Times. And I was staring at these tight, punchy articles with 7 ways to blah, blah, blah. So I was writing that kind of stuff too for my blog. So Books they required more of me, and I didn't at that time see how much more rewarding they were. And I had trouble, which is part of what the podcast is for people that like the slightly past version of yourself. I didn't know how to find books because there's way too many of them.
Yeah, I think
no chance to find them.
One of the other questions I was going to ask you is like how this ties into your other work. And I think it's kind of interesting to think about how, when you were writing your blog, you were trying to find ways to focus on happiness, but you weren't actually feeling happy yourself.
Yeah.
And you weren't reading.
Yeah.
Now you've done a lot of thinking about happiness and you are a lot happier and you're reading lots. So I wonder about that like connection between happiness and reading.
Yeah.
And whether that has anything to do with your inspiration or whether it will inform what you do with the podcast.
Yeah. And I feel like in some sense, wherever you are in your life, you can look backwards and you can, there's a ton of scribbly, dusty paths leading to where you are today. And you somehow see a straight line, So today I'm 38 years old. I look back on my life and I'm like, oh, clearly 1000awesomethings.com led to the Books of Awesome, which led to the Happiness Equation and the TED Talks and all these speeches about happiness. Like that's clearly one big path about happiness, but really, I don't know where the path is going. I'm still in the middle of the forest. I'm still trying to discover that journey myself.
Totally, but even simpler than that, we know that books do improve happiness.
Oh,
reading is a really good happiness practice.
Totally. Yeah.
I just read a study the other day that was saying how reading a book works better than going on a walk, works better than talking to a friend. Like it actually changes the pace at which your brain is going and can help you get out of a bad mood and help you feel calm. And we see that in our own lives. Like we use our books at night sometimes when we're feeling anxious or tangled up, and it really like helps us calm down. So
yeah,
of course it's a really great thing that books allow us to like live other lives. They also potentially let us live our own lives better.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I feel like that is a really natural tie.
If people are reading more, they're also likely to be happier.
Thank you very much to my beautiful wife, Leslie, who also gave us number 1000 on our list of 1000 formative books, Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shel Silverstein. I probably had like a couple dozen emails written to me personally about chapter 1 of the show, by the way. A couple dozen of them compliment Leslie. Your wife's amazing. She's super smart. Wow, I could listen to her all day. And I'm like, the whole time I'm like, damn, you're right. And I'm sorry that you're stuck with me because my wife is so much more interesting and intelligent. But you know what? I'll have to bring her back in some ways. Maybe at the end of this one. Okay, now let's move on to chapter 2. After Leslie helped me conceal the vision, I called up my friend Frank Warren. Frank Warren, who is the curator of the largest advertisement-free blog in the world, ad-free, of course, a little bit of an inspiration for me. That is postsecret.com. Postsecret.com, spawn of super viral TED Talk, 6 New York Times bestselling books, Post Secret live events all over the world. He's been featured at TED. He's been featured at South by Southwest. He's been featured all over the place. Frank Warren and I get together on a balcony in San Diego, and I opened the entire show by making a complete fool of myself. Let's listen in. So right now I thought we could talk about books, a topic you and I have not touched on that often over the years. We've talked a lot about blogs. We've talked a lot about putting out books and book deals and how to get a book launched, but we haven't talked about our formative books. So I invited you down here today to this sunny balcony in San Diego to talk about your most formative books. Yeah. And before I did, I asked you to fill out this funny little survey where I tried to uncover them, and I brought and read what I thought were your 3 most formative books. And just before we pressed record, I was like, wow, your first book, Frank, and here I'm going to announce it. Your first book is Hard Times by Charles Dickens, published in 1854. And what did you just say right before I pressed record when I said that?
I was like, that's not the right book. Oh, no, there's another Hard Times. The one I had read years ago was by Studs Terkel. And it's funny because there are probably similarities and differences, but Studs Terkel is someone who I really admire for a number of reasons. And it all started by reading this book when I was in college.
So I want to get into that, and I'm horribly embarrassed that the very first book I'm recording with one of my closest friends, I just read this 300-page epic, and the whole time I was reading it on the plane down here, you know what I thought? I'm like, I get why Frank picked this. How humiliating that I read the wrong book. But after I recover enough and we keep going, Frank and I get into a larger theme of trust. He's often called America's most trusted stranger. So let's talk about trust now. We're talking about Hard Times by Studs Terkel as Frank's first of his 3 most formative books. And he's just shared how he builds trust. You know, you have been called America's most trusted stranger by a number of sources. Your website, postsecret.com, has nearly 1 billion hits. You have, I believe, 5 or 6 New York Times best-selling books. And you have these events. It's the way I met you. And I was moved when I saw you live. How do you build trust?
Well, I was never that kid in high school who everybody told their secret to, that's for sure. But using the web, I think I captured a few techniques that allowed strangers to be able to confide in me. Using postcards and confessions, people were kind of guaranteed anonymity. There was no way to connect who was sharing the secret. On the website itself, I treated everybody's secret and story with honor and respect and dignity. There was no snarkiness. There was no judgment. And then on the website too, even though it was very popular and I had a lot of opportunities, I've never taken $1 for a paid ad on this website that's had over 700 million hits because I didn't want to be seen as commercializing or monetizing people's secrets. So just simple steps like that, I think, allowed it to take off in a way where once the first few people started sharing and they saw that it was safe and there were these extraordinary stories being told, other people wanted to join that conversation. But that's very different than getting people to stand up at a live event and tell something out loud for the first time they've never told their spouse, their psychiatrist, a close friend.
Yeah.
That's a whole different kind of nut to crack.
And for those that don't know, at Frank's live events, he has people do that. You have people stand up at microphones and say to the audience, this is my secret. I've never told anyone this before, but I had an eating disorder when I was in high school and I'm still recovering from it. Or, they come out with these large, huge things that are inside and their friends around them applaud and cheer and sort of celebrate that person. And it's a transformative experience. And you do, we're celebrating Studs Terkel's ability to build trust with everyday people. You do that in your live events.
Well, it's been a long journey. When I started this project, I had horrible stage fright. And when I came out with the first Post Secret book, as you know, you go on book tour. You go to bookstores and talk about the books. You answer questions. And I would be so nervous, I had to take beta blockers. And even with that, I was very uncomfortable. But as I did it more and more, I just felt the importance of conveying these stories and how special it was. And I kind of made up my mind, if I got up to speak about the book and my face turned red or my heart started beating, I would just keep going because these were important stories of conversations we wanted to have but weren't. And as that went on month after month, I got an idea in my head. What if I could do at a live event what the website does in the digital world? What if I could create a safe, non-judgmental, compassionate social space where people could stand up and share, just like the brave people were doing on postcards every week? That was the goal.
It's amazing. It's beautiful. And what a nice little thread line from the work you do today all the way to this book you read when you were 21 years old that was published in 1970, Hard Times by Studs Terkel, a book I had never heard of, and even on the plane here, mistook for Hard Times by Charles Dickens, which is 300 pages of my life I won't get back, but it was still a good book. Maybe someone else in a future episode will pick it, and I'll be like, good, I've read that one. Thank you so much to my good friend, Frank Warren. And just how incredible, in this era of such incredible distrust and mistrust, trust levels in business, government, media, all at all-time lows, just to have the gift of hearing how a man, like often called America's most trusted stranger, can articulate and cogently think about how he thinks about building trust. I love that. And for those of you who are going to South by Southwest next year, Frank Warren and I are hosting a panel called Building Trust in an Era of Distrust and Mistrust. So if you feel like coming to Austin next March, we would love to meet you in person, and Frank and I will be there together with a third panelist, which we are still confirming, but they're going to be a great third person. I can't reveal yet because we're still talking to them. So Frank, what'd you give us? You gave us number 999, Hard Times, An Oral History of the Great Depression by Studs Terkel. You gave us number 998, Jonathan Livingston Seagull by Richard Bach. And you gave us number 997, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas by Hunter S. Thompson. After leaving that sunny balcony in San Diego, I ended up going somewhere the exact opposite, flying through a ridiculous snowstorm. Had to change my airline at the airport, which is really hard. If you've ever had to change your airplane, that's one thing. Changing your airline at the airport is really hard. I think I'd switched from like Air Canada to WestJet because my flights were canceled. But I knew I needed to get to Yonkers. Okay, I need to get to Yonkers, stay in a hotel, kind of get there late at night. I get up in the morning. I'm kind of, taking some deep breaths and prep myself to go meet Seth Godin, in person for the first time. Marketing guru, best-selling author of 18 books, inducted into the Marketing Hall of Fame, the Seth Godin, like host of one of the most popular blogs in the world. I'm going to meet him. And so I go to the gym in Yonkers to kind of get prepped, like kind of do some weights. And I bump into this guy on the treadmill. We start chatting and he can tell I'm kind of nervous or whatever. So he's like, what's going on? I tell him, I'm about to interview Seth Godin for my podcast. And he actually gives me like this amazing, like Yoda-like advice, like the stranger on the treadmill advice at my hotel in Yonkers. And so I asked him if I could record it. And I did. And I did not reveal this on the actual Seth Godin chapter, but I'm going to share with you now. Here is what he said to me. Let's listen in.
Are you rolling? So when you're there interviewing them, be grateful, but remember that they're not doing you a favor, that you're doing them a favor, that you're there not because they are them, but because you are you.
I love that. I love that treadmill man in the gym. And thank you for letting me share that. You're not there because he's him. You're there because you're you. Good kind of confidence builder. So with that, I take a bunch of deep breaths. I jump into the Uber. I go to Hastings on Hudson, and I get welcomed into Seth Godin's studio. And his very first formative book is called The Book of Est, spelled E-S-T, by Luke Reinhardt. And so we jump into the conversation talking about self-help books and how you tell yourself a different story. Here you go.
There are a lot of people who don't like self-help books. And there are a lot of people who would like to criticize people like me for writing self-help books. I think there's almost no such thing as self-help. Or actually I should say it the opposite way. I think almost all help is self-help. If you're drowning, it's really unlikely that someone will pick you up and take you out of the water. It is way more likely that someone will throw you a life buoy or reach out with a long stick or try to help you swim to shore. But if you don't want to do it, you're probably not going to get saved. And that what we seek to do when we want to do better, when we want to feel better, when we want to make a better difference, is help ourselves, is commit to moving forward. And that all a self-help book does, if it's doing a good job, is open the door for you to fix yourself. That the author can't fix you. That a diet book can't make you skinny, and a book on goal setting can't make you successful. What it can do is open the door. And so if you say, I don't like self-help books, they're always trying to do this and this and this, you might be saying, well, actually, I don't want to help myself get out of this spot I'm in, because I'm comfortable being unhappy. I'm comfortable being stuck. And that the problem with reading a book like this is it might work. And if it works, then I'll have to change. And if I change, that might be uncomfortable. So with that preface, my story is that I was unsuccessful and unhappy a few years after that book came out, in 1979, 1980 in college. That I had a narrative in my head that things weren't working. And every time something didn't work, I would go, oh, there it goes again. And it was a schlemiel schlemazel, bucket of water on the head kind of thing. I was Laurel and Hardy all in one. And I had an RA in my dorm, the resident director, who had been to the ESTS training.
Oh, interesting. So where was the college?
In Boston.
You're in Boston,
yeah. Yeah, not Harvard. For people who didn't get into Harvard. And she and her husband were constantly pushing people like me to go take EST. Therefore, I didn't want to do it because it felt really culty. And the way EST worked was it was expensive, not by today's standards, but in those days. You went for 15 hours on Saturday and 15 hours on Sunday. And then and they wouldn't let you take a bathroom break. They wouldn't let you take a water break, and you didn't get to eat very much. And then there'd be 2 days off, and then Wednesday night you'd go back for 2 or 3 hours. And then Thursday and Friday you'd have time off, and then another weekend also of 13 hours a day. It was this grueling brainwashing thing. And I'm like, I'm not going to this. I'm not going to this for 100 different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
No. So I end up...
And you're shilling. I mean, the book refers to it being $250
Yeah.
and $70.
Right, exactly. So it was expensive. But also just the very culty way the whole thing was presented was not my thing. And so I went to visit my sister in North Carolina, which is a long drive from Boston. And I did a ride share, so someone came with me, and this person who was with me was pretty depressive. And so there I am in the car with my ADD looking around trying for information, and the only thing to do is talk to this person who's not very happy. I'm not very happy. And I'm driving for, I don't know, 11 hours to North Carolina. And I get to North Carolina, hang out with my sister for a few hours. But she's got friends, so she goes to hang out with her friends. What am I going to do?
She leaves you immediately.
And so she was at Duke, and I go to they had in the middle of this beautiful campus, a used book sale. And I'm walking up and down the used book sale, because even then I love bookstores. And I see this book, The Book of Est. And I say to myself, wow, a used book, $2. I'll read the book. I won't have to go to the big cult training. Problem solved. Okay. So the reason I suggested this book for one of the 3 books I want to talk about is this. On every single page of this book, without a doubt, there is nonsense. The theories, nonsense. The approaches, manipulative. I am not standing behind 96% of the things that are in this book. However, what Luke, or whatever the person's real name is, did,
George,
that I have
Cockcroft.
almost never seen occur in a book, is in a nonfiction book, he brought me there. And partly it was because I had been driving, and partly because I was where I was in my brain, but I was there. I experienced the thing, and I sat and I read it and I read it, and I probably missed going to dinner with my sister. I don't remember that part. There were moments that I was in tears. I was there. And that was a miracle that you could do that in a book. And I am not exaggerating that my life changed that day. I got all the stuff that Est was trying to get people to get from reading that book. So I didn't have to go. I didn't have to become part of a cult. And I will tell you, because I studied philosophy and brain science, and I've been paying attention ever since, there's a lot of stuff in there that's a germ of a truth, but most of it's surrounded by nonsense. So the part where they read other people's minds, this is nonsense. Do not say I thought it was a good idea, because I didn't. But I will tell you,
all cap screaming, a lot of swearing, a lot of wrestling.
Well, yeah, because they're brainwashing people, and that's understandable, right? But the punchline, though, is it's the best kind of self-help, because all he did was open the door for me, and I was ready. And if I had read that book a year earlier, it might not have made a difference. And if I had read it a year later, it might have been too late. But the door was open, and I said, you know what? Your problem is not the outside world. Your problem is the story you're telling yourself about the outside world. And that story is a choice. If you're not happy with the story, tell yourself another story. Period.
Thank you so much to the incredible Seth Godin. Tell yourself a different story. And as we go into the new year, just take a breath. I'm thinking about that myself. Like, what stories are we telling ourselves right now that we can change for 2019 and beyond? Life is short, and we get one go. And sometimes it's just about extracting a little story we have in our minds and just redirecting ourselves slightly, facing the new year and a new chunk of our life with a different sense of ourselves. Seth Godin, the amazing Seth Godin, just gave us book number 996 on our list, The Book of Est by Luke Reinhardt. Number 995, See You at the Top by Zig Ziglar. And number 994, Linchpin by Seth Godin. We have a hilarious conversation about why he picked that book. Hilarious and insightful. And now, so where do we go after that? Okay, so I'm traveling a lot here. I'm in San Diego. I'm in Hastings-on-Hudson in New York. Now I come home. I come home to where the heart is, to where Sarah Ramsey is, my absolute favorite bookseller in the world, the amazing, the inspiring, the brilliant Sarah Ramsey. So we sit down together in her bookstore, the Book City in High Park in Toronto. It's kind of like Bloor West Village, High Park area, just west of the downtown. So there's like phones ringing in the background. There's customers coming up with us as we're recording this. And now we'll jump into the last question I asked Sarah, where she helps congeal together some of our 3 books' values. For anyone who's out there who is in the book selling business like you are, who is so good at it like you are, you were my favorite bookseller in the world. Like I come here and you just connect me to these books I never would know to. What are your 1 or 2 pieces of wisdom? How do you do the thing you do so well?
Oh dear. Well, I think the biggest piece of advice I would have to give someone is just really listen. I find we don't listen a whole lot. Like I was explaining to you earlier, it's very subtle and it's very nuanced when you're talking to someone about their books. I find that a lot of people come in here and they feel a lot of shame because they like to read from a particular genre and people haven't like valued that kind of genre. I used to work in a bookstore that separated its literature from its fiction. And ultimately what that meant is that the fiction was there to be mass consumed and it was typically in a mass market format, whereas the literature was in a trade paperback. And I think that made a lot of readers feel really isolated and kind of shamed.
I'm in the dumb section.
Me too, I think. But like, no one should ever say to you, well, here's a guilty pleasure for you to read. You should never feel guilty about what you want to read. If you enjoyed mysteries, which is not really my jam, have at it. Not everybody enjoys like the food writing that I'm trying to, really talk about a lot of times. And if you find something that you are not really into, know when to keep trying with it and know when to just say, yeah, this really wasn't my thing. But I think ultimately listening is the most important thing to do when you have a job like this.
Eliminating book shame, eliminating book guilt, beautiful values that we espouse at 3 Books. Thank you so much, Sarah, for this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to the incredible Sarah Ramsey, who helps confirm 2 of our values, right? Humans are the best algorithm, and definitely no book shame, no book guilt. There is no wrong reading, I should say, not rating. Reading? How do you say reading? That's a book podcast. I should know how to pronounce reading. But there's no guilt about that. Important note for everyone listening, Sarah has since moved stores. She wanted me to let you all know she's just around the corner. So if you are in Toronto and you know the Book City that she was at, she's now at the Another Story bookstore in the Roncesvalles neighborhood of Toronto. So she's just moved kind of down the street, but if you're looking for her, you won't find her there anymore. So she's moved around the corner to Another Story bookstore. I know, it's a big change. It's a big change for me too, but I still know where Sarah is, and I go find her there now. So we're going to stick in Toronto. Oh, wait a minute. I didn't summarize Sarah's books. Let me do that first. Okay, so Sarah, which books did you give us? Let's see here. Number 993, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, by Judy Blume. Number 992, Autobiography of a Face, by Lucy Greeley. And number 991, Light Boxes, by Shane Jones. And we had a lot of interesting conversation about those 3 books. Thank you so much to Sarah. So Sarah was chapter 4, and now we're going to move on to chapter 5. We're going to stick in Toronto as we sit down with the incredible Gretchen Rubin. I was lucky Gretchen was in Toronto. She lives in New York, but she was coming through Toronto on book tour for her new book, The 4 Tendencies. And the kind folks at Penguin Random House were able to put us together in a little boardroom, serve us hamburgers, and cordon us off for half an hour. We could sit down and talk about Gretchen Rubin's 3 most formative books. If you don't know Gretchen, she's the author of such huge international bestsellers as The Happiness Project and Better Than Before and the aforementioned 4 Tendencies. I kind of just wanted to say the word aforementioned. She's amazing. She's a wonder. If you don't know her, check her out, GretchenRubin.com. She also hosts an incredible podcast called Happier with her sister, Elizabeth Kraft, who we're about to talk about. Because would you believe that in 2018, Gretchen picked the only health book on our list of the top 1,000? So the the only health book in the entire year was picked by Gretchen Rubin. And I thought her conversation around this book, which is called Why We Get Fat by Gary Taubes, was really interesting and kind of compelling. So let's listen in.
So this is a book that I picked up because my sister's a type 1 diabetic. And so I'm very interested in insulin, which of course is the life-saving hormone that all type 1 diabetics are dependent on, and for their very lives. Of course. So it's like high stakes. And so but I didn't know that much about insulin. And so I was in a bookstore and I was just like flipping through this book. It's a provocative title, Why We Get Fat. Yeah. And so I read it not because I particularly wanted to lose weight, but because I saw that it was all about insulin. And this was something that kind of always in the back of my mind. I was like, I should really like learn more about the function of insulin because of my sister.
Elizabeth is
a type 1 diabetic. And but I had this crazy experience, which is why this was so formative. So I was like on vacation with my in-laws and my family, which is something that we do every year. And I think this was 4 or 5 years ago now. And it was just like in the bag as one of the books that I packed for vacation. And I read it, and overnight I changed everything about the way I ate. I found it so utterly convincing, so compelling, that I was like, I am just going to change except for eating like chicken and leafy green vegetables. Everything changed about the way that I ate. And because I was just so utterly persuaded by his arguments about the role of insulin, the role of carbohydrates and fat. Yeah. And the fact is, everything he says in the book basically is not controversial because everybody insulin is very, very well understood. It's been known for many, many decades, and its purpose and in the body is pretty well understood. And I was just like, this explains so many things that have puzzled me over the years. I'm just gonna try it.
And it's such an analytical, research-based point of view. There's no pictures of food in here. There's no menus.
Yes.
It's like, let's start from 100 years ago and talk about what happened and why this got.
And the basic argument, if you like want the nutshell version, is the role of insulin in the body is it's like the storage and release of fat. If you're more likely to gain and retain fat if your insulin is high. And the thing that raises insulin is eating carbs. So if you don't eat carbs, your insulin will fall, and then you'll be more likely to burn fat. And it's like, and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to try it. I remember the first day that instead of having like my bran cereal and my skim milk for breakfast, I ate like scrambled eggs and bacon. And I'm like, I hope Gary Taubes is right, because I'm like giving it a shot. And it just had an amazing effect on my body in every possible way. And So it was, but one of the things that was funny about this was, if you look, because then later when I was writing my book Better Than Before, which is all about habit formation, the thing that was weird is I was always trying to understand, how do you explain how people change habits? Yeah. And usually what the tradition, back to what we were saying earlier, if I'm going to tell you what to do, Neil, what you need to do is make incremental change. Yeah. Don't you try to do anything that's too abrupt. Try to do like, maybe you'll substitute this for this, and like try that, these things. Yeah. And I didn't do that at all. I changed everything overnight.
Like overnight?
Literally overnight. Like literally, I'm like, I went to bed, I'm like, woke up the next morning, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to put this to work and let's see what happens. And so in my book, Better Than Before, I call this the strategy of the lightning bolt, which is like, and it doesn't happen often, but when it happens, it's super powerful, which is when you just get a new idea, a new realization, and you're just like, and then your habits just automatically change. Like, oh, I have to quit smoking because my baby was just born, and I can't have my baby in a house full of cigarette smoke. Overnight. Like somebody who has struggled for years could find it easy. Yeah. Because just that one realization. So, because I was sort of puzzled. How did I do that? Yeah. Like, it just changed everything. I mean, like, I don't eat sugar. And I mean, I don't eat sugar. I don't eat flour. I don't eat rice. I don't eat starchy vegetables.
And we're in a conference room where you and I were both given a really nice lunch about half an hour ago by the kind people at Penguin Roundhouse. They brought me a hamburger on a white bun and a salad, and they brought you a hamburger patty on lettuce with a Diet Coke. Yeah. And you know what? If you look right behind me, I didn't eat my bun. Is there. You know why I left the bun? It wasn't because I saw yours and I was like, I want to be a graduate. It's because I read this book.
Yes, because it's so compelling.
It's so compelling. It is so compelling, and I am still picking around my hamburger buns to this day. I mean, I'm not like as hardcore as Gretchen. I didn't sort of just cut them out completely and zero sugars or anything. I think I'm just like a carb snob now. Like, I want my carbs to count. Like, I just sort of like, the cinnamon bun, it's got to be like freshly baked for me to eat it. The bread at the restaurant, it's got to be warm. There's got to be like salted butter. I'm a carb snob. I just want I want like the carbs to be like them to count. So hamburger buns don't usually count. Don't usually make the cut. So after a couple chapters in Toronto, chapter 4 with Sarah, chapter 5 with Gretchen, we're now going to fly all the way down to Key West, Florida. Not an easy place to get to. I happened to be in Miami. I was given a speech down there. And so I took and like my speech finished at like 11 in the morning, but my flight home was at like 6 p.m. So I had like 7 hours. And in that 7 hours, I was able to catch a flight from Miami to Key West, trek from the airport to Books and Books, Judy Blume's bookstore that she owns and operates. Even though she's 80 years old, a big proponent of never retiring, like I talk about in the happiness equation, for those who might have read it. And we sit down, we have this incredible chat, and then I fly back from Key West to Miami just in time to make my 6 p.m. flight home. So let's go all the way down to Key West, Florida. The first thing, and does Judy Blume need an introduction? I don't know. She's sold like 80 million books. Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing, Super Fudge. I could go on and on and on. But the more important thing is that she loves books as much as all of us. And I think that was evident. I think that was evident a few minutes into the conversation. Here's where it went.
Oh, it's an incredible series. This is a Betsy Tacy
You brought
book.
one here?
I brought one called Heaven to Betsy and Betsy in Spite of Herself. But it starts when it starts with Betsy and Tacy, two friends, and they're very young. They're 5 or 6. And it goes, and the series takes you through Betsy's marriage. I love it so much. It makes me cry.
No, it's beautiful. Please
and when they re-released these books not that many years ago, they asked women writers who had grown up on them to do forwards. And so I see that the forward of the book that I've brought to show you is by Laura Lippman, whose newest mystery we have here right now on the table. And I wrote the forward to, I'm not sure which one, Betsy and Tacy Go Over the Big Hill, I think.
Well, you could probably hear it, but you couldn't see it. I'm sitting across from Judy Blume and she's like tearing up. She's crying about how much she loves this book. And that's the sense of love that we all have and can have about the power of these words. So we go from there, and then we start talking about an interesting conversation about reading books from alternate points of view, especially boys reading books that have girls as the lead, and vice versa. So let's listen in.
I think it's great, by the way, when boys read books about girls and girls read books about boys. And I have had many letters who said, I learned everything about girls from reading your books, from
Are You There, God? It's Me,
guys.
Margaret. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
I think it's good.
Why do people do that enough? Can we do that more, do you think? Is there ways?
I think we should do that more. And I've learned so much in the store. I see that all the time, especially grandparents. And they'll say, but this is about a girl, and I don't think he'll read about a girl. They never say this is about a boy, and I don't think she'll read about a boy.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And you're saying, and I'm agreeing with you, that they're probably wrong, because I grew up on the Babysitters Club on my sister's bookshelf. And frankly, if you wanted me to keep confessing here for some reason, I also flipped through her Tiger Beats and stuff like that, and her YM magazines. Because there was this thing called Say Anything, and it was like girls' embarrassing confessions of, getting a period with white jeans in the school. And I would read that, and I'd be like,
that's
what
good.
is that? Yeah, I was so curious about it.
Mm-hmm. And girl, I mean, the more we understand, I think the more we see the similarities.
I love that. Yes, the more views, the better. The more views, the better, because back to the origin quote of this entire podcast, a reader lives 1,000 lives before they die. The man who never reads lives only one. The more we understand, the more we see that our similarities. Thank you so much to Judy Blume for adding 3 more books to our list. Oh no. I just realized I didn't read Gretchen Rubin's 3 books, did I? Okay, let me do both now, because I totally messed up there. So Gretchen Rubin gave us number 990 on our list, Little House in the Big Woods by Laura Ingalls Wilder. She also gave us number 989, Autobiography of Benjamin Franklin by Benjamin Franklin. That should be The Autobiography of Benjamin Franklin by Benjamin Franklin. And she gave us number 988, Why We Get Fat and What to Do About It by Gary Taubes. Back to Judy. Judy gave us number 987, Madeline by Ludwig Bemelins. I'm never going to say that name right, am I? Number 986, Oz, the complete paperback collection, the complete series by L. Frank Baum. I know it's a series, but we gave Judy a little fudge there. She didn't want to pick one Oz. We went with a series. And number 985, Heaven to Betsy and Betsy in Spite of Herself by Maud Hart Lovelace. Thank you so much to Judy Blume for adding 3 more books on our list to get to the top 1,000. So, where are we going to go now? We are going to go somewhere really interesting for chapter 7. I'm coming out of a bar. I'm hailing an Uber. The guy's rating is like 4.99 and he's got like 5,000 rides. I'm like, this is going to be the best Uber driver ever. Sure enough, it is. It's Vishwas Agrawal. I'd never met him before. We made an instant connection. This is a pretty epic conversation in the back of his Uber. Let's jump into the conversation with Vishwas Agrawal, the world's greatest Uber driver, who perhaps not coincidentally drives a Honda Insight, with emphasis on the insight. So much wisdom, so much knowledge. We're talking about The Magic of Thinking Big by David Schwartz. That's the book right now. And let's go over to Vish. What did you get out of this book?
So many things. The most important thing was, which I still remember, this book gave me a formula in life always. Formula of yes man and no man. You know, he explains about the human brain is like a thought of factories, you know, and in this factory there are 2 foremen who work. One is a no man and the other is yes man. Mm-hmm. So given every task or every thought, whatever we have in our mind, it depends, the output depends on the job given to yes man or no man. So it's very magical. If you give the job to a no man, your own mind will start finding logics and reasons to finally prove that yes, how can't you do this job? So finally you become negative about this aspect.
Right.
But on the contrary,
is a no man someone who says no a lot?
No, he's just a no man. He'll say no for everything.
And the yes man says yes to everything?
Yes, everything.
Okay, so
keep
going, yeah.
You know debate competition? How debate competitions are. So it's like one of the debate competition we do. A person who is speaking in favor, he also looks quite right. A person who is speaking in against, he also has valid reasons and valid logics. So at a time you feel both are correct. Mm-hmm. The same thing
it's like any presidential debate or politician debate, and classic scene in any movie in the courtroom. You're like, you agree with both sides of the
Absolutely,
argument.
yeah, because both are logical, right? Because human mind, we go with logics, right? So he explained, if it is both way correct, right? And if giving it to no man, you're getting into a negative side, or you're eventually losing the task. Why not to give it to yes man? Mm-hmm. So it's the same thought your brain will work and give you reasons towards it. That was the most important thought, which has changed all my life afterwards.
What did you do differently?
So I started working on my yes man. That's what I do in Uber as well now.
Yeah.
So yes man is like, I know I'm doing a service, right?
Yeah.
So if my rider wants a little small thing, which maybe like giving a direction how to change his route.
Yeah.
So I don't mind. It's fine. He's paying for the ride. He has some right over the ride, the road, where to go, how to go.
What else do you do for riders? What else do you do for people in their car that most Uber drivers don't do?
To be honest, I don't know really about the other Uber drivers.
Right.
But I just try to...
What are some other things you do for people?
I first of all forget where I come from. I have to play a role of Uber driver right now, so I just try to be in car to play the Uber driver role. Because I think a lot of guys may be doing it part-time or at the side.
Yeah.
So they're still under the hat of their daytime job or whatever.
Right.
So they don't realize the value of this job, and probably they're just doing it at the side, so they don't have the value of really giving the right service at the place.
I mean, I noticed I get in your car, you got no music playing, and I feel weird saying this. I got a 4.72 rating. Okay, I don't know if that's good or bad. It's probably bad, isn't it?
4.72 is not as bad.
Okay, well, I'm worried. Okay, I'm a 4.7, but I always say, excuse me, could you turn off the radio? That's the first thing I say. So the first thing I say when I get in the Uber is, excuse me, can you turn off the radio? And sometimes if I feel bad, I say, I got to make a phone call. But really, I just don't want to listen to whatever that random music is. I kind of want to think about something, or
So
ring my cell phone.
I don't keep my radio on at all.
That's what I'm saying. You're the only one I know that does that. And also, there's no smell in your car.
Okay.
And most cars have a smell. I'm not saying it's a good smell or a bad smell, but most cars have a smell. They have like a little pine tree hanging down, or like some dude sprayed himself with Axe. I've smelled weed in a car before. Like, there is odors in cars, and your car is like perfect. It's like, I don't know how you do that because you have so many drivers, so many passengers.
So I think this is this car is my office, right?
Yeah.
This is the only office I have in this business. So I'm supposed to keep it up. I'm supposed to maintain it. I'm supposed to clean it. Every day when I go home, I take out the carpets, I clean them. If it is snowing, they're dirty, I clean them. I wash them every day. I dry them up. I decked up my car in the night itself so that I have no time to waste in the morning, and I start my work like this. I fill up my gas tank. I do everything about cleaning in the car at the night. So I clean it every day.
Oh, I love Vish. That little snippet just doesn't do the entire chapter justice, just like any of these snippets in the show, but it's just a taste, a little morsel. What happened after this podcast came out? A lot. First of all, it launched kind of like a fervor. First, I wrote an article for Fast Company called 7 Secrets of Customer Service from the World's Greatest Uber Driver. That went viral on Fast Company. It became the #2 article of the summer of 2018 on their website. So they publish a list of like the top 10 articles of their summer, I guess July and August. And this article is #2 overall on the entire website. Vish then got picked up kind of by Uber. So Uber like tweets about it. Uber brings him into the head office. Radio and TV shows start calling him up. He does a bunch of radio and TV shows. We play on future chapters, like snippets from Vish kind of going on TV and radio. And there's so many big questions that he brings to mind. I think about it all the time. It's like, which hat are you wearing? Are you the yes man? Are you the no man? How much pride do you take in your work, even if it's not measured by anybody else? And so also, in like this kind of connection point back to chapter 3 with Seth Godin, the real big question is, which story are you telling yourself? Which story are you telling yourself about what you're doing? Which I think is just a good phrase and a good question to ask as we go into 2019. Which story are you telling yourself about what you're doing in your life? Thank you to the incredible Vishwas Agrawal for giving us number 984, You Can Win by Shiv Khera. Number 983, The Magic of Thinking Big by David J. Schwartz. And number 982, Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson. You heard, by the way, in that chapter 7 with Vishwas Agrawal, like I was at one point, I'm like going back to the CN Tower. Well, in chapter 8, I actually go up the CN Tower. So that's the tallest freestanding structure in the Western Hemisphere of the world. It was the tallest freestanding structure for like 3 decades or something till those folks over in the UAE built a taller one. And I go up to the top with the incredible Sarah Anderson. That's Andersen. She is the author of the super viral comic phenomenon that is Sarah's Scribbles, right? So 3 books, 3 bestsellers in 3 years. And, you know, these strips articulate a view of the world from like a millennial standpoint about sort of social anxiety and awkwardness and trying to find a job and like settling into yourself in a way that almost nothing does, which I'm sure is why they are super viral. It was so kind of Sarah to say yes to my invitation to talk about her 3 most formative books. Let's listen in. And remember, we're in the CN Tower here, so you're going to hear like tourists walking around us as we discuss the young adult book called Wild Magic by Tamara Pierce. Here we go.
I feel like every reader has one fantasy book in their childhood that just sort of like really engulfs that part of their world, because I think children have like such vivid internal worlds and like really imaginative places they go to. And for me, that was this book. And, you know, it just like consumed me. And so the main character is female, which was also really formative for me. And she has the ability to speak to animals. And I was totally one of those kids that like, if I could have a power, that's what it would be. And the second of these is actually called Wolf Speaker. So when I was like 11, I was like one of those wolf girls. Like I wore shirts with like Native American wolves on them, and I had like super long hippie hair. That's like my favorite version of myself.
Wow. So can I ask 2 whys? Why was your favorite, the skill you most desired, talking to animals as opposed to mine, which is being invisible. And why was that your favorite version of yourself as you keep telling us the story?
Okay, well, I think it's funny because my character in Sarah talks to animals in the comic strip, right?
Perfect,
so it's sort of like carried over. I think it sort of shows in the comic, like I always really loved animals. And when I was younger, I wanted to be a biologist. So that's always been like an important part of me, and it sort of remains in adulthood. And I think it was sort of formed in these years. And your second question, why was that my favorite version?
Yeah, why was the long-haired wolf sweatshirt wearing version of you, as opposed to the version now wearing like the camo jacket, black shoes, black pants? Mm-hmm. Why the long-hair wolf version? Because
I was so like unabashedly enthusiastic about things, and I had no shame about being a nerd. You know, like I really was into this like fantasy wolf speaking world. And obviously I like to draw and was kind of like a weird artsy kid. And I was just so like simple about it. I didn't have any of those like self-conscious fears yet. And I did whatever I wanted to do without like worrying about what people thought of me. And so, you know, if I could go back and like meet myself at a specific time, I would love to go back and just like talk to 11-year-old me who was like this enthusiastic wolf girl and like drawing anime in my sketchbooks.
And we're both smiling and laughing, but there's something so beautiful about this idea that you had no shame and no worry. I mean, one of the values we have on 3 Books is no book guilt, no book shame. So we say that whatever you, and I'm so glad you gave us a book that's from your childhood with a badger on the cover, Wild Magic. Because there's nothing about the show that wants to judge readers. We think judgment gets in the way of reading. Yeah. And so how do we tease out more of those shameless sides of ourselves?
That's a difficult question because I have a lot of book shame actually. And I read like an information processor. Like I read almost all nonfiction. And so I'm kind of bad at answering that question because I'm sort of like self-conscious with my media choices. I think maybe it comes back to like how I write Sarah Scribbles. It's just following like the part of your intuition that you feel is really honest and not being afraid to show it, because I feel like part of being like cool or self-conscious is a deception. And I think everyone has the potential to be deceiving in that way. So I think those like nerdier parts of ourselves, like I think we always understand them when we see them in other people. We just for some reason have a fear of showing it in ourselves. And I think that's kind of bull, isn't it?
Yes, Sarah, it is kind of bull. I love your take though. And I love thinking about these questions. Like what is your favorite version of yourself? What is your favorite version of yourself? And how can you tap back into that? Or think about how you can bring more of that version out if you are in the process of adulting. Thank you, Sarah. I love talking to you. And by the way, as I read and record this now, Sarah Anderson has just won another coveted award. She's the winner of the Goodreads 2018 Best Book of the Year award in the category of, what is it, memoir, graphic novel? Let me check right now. Yeah, graphic novels and comics. So like as if she doesn't have enough feathers in her cap, she just won another gigantic award. Those Goodreads awards are huge right now. They're the only like fan voted book awards out there. At least I think that's how they're billed. So Sarah, thank you for giving us number 981, Wild Magic by Tamora Pierce. I think I said Tamara earlier. Tamora? I'm sorry, Tamora. Number 980, Hyperbole and a Half by Ali Broche. That book is incredible. And number 979, Crash Override by Zoe Quinn. Okay. Now we've been in Toronto a little too long, so it's time to go back down to Florida. We are going to Coral Gables, Florida, just outside of Miami, where we're sitting down with the incredible Dave Barry. This was like a lifelong dream for me because I grew up reading Dave Barry's humor columns in my local Toronto Star newspaper. They were, of course, syndicated to over 500 newspapers throughout the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. Dave Barry was such a prominent humorist that he won a Pulitzer Prize. And it's just sort of like Sarah, laden with all kinds of awards. So let's talk a little bit with Dave Barry Dave Barry about, let's take it off from Sarah. It's like, how do you help your favorite version of yourself come out? Well, one way is just to be more courageous. Let your own thoughts pull them out. So down in Coral Gables, let's talk about how Dave has done this and was inspired to do this by Robert Benchley, who gave us the book Chips Off the Old Benchley for 3 Books podcast. Here we go.
From the moment I started reading Robert Benchley, that was my standard of what was really funny. And no question, I was influenced by when I started writing newspaper humor columns, which I started in high school and then college, and then when I got to work for a newspaper. Art Buchwald was huge then. Irma Bombeck, Russell Baker, there were a lot of good newspaper humor writers. I said Russell Baker, but the one I wanted to be like was Robert Benchley. I wanted to have that element of, beyond satire, just into just pure crazy, where he would just veer off the road. And the other thing is and this is, you have to be brave to do this or but he would start a column on one topic and end up on a completely different topic and just end it, and no effort whatever to go back to anything, or, he didn't care. He just thought, whatever struck him as funny is what he would write. And, that's the kind of humor I wanted to write.
And, there's this great line from the, forward of this book. They say, I should probably, as I keep mentioning this forward, I should probably say who wrote the forward. Forward was written by Frank Sullivan, who I don't know, you may know. It says, every sentence I quoted about, you don't know where it's going to end up. In one of the essays, he says, Mr. Costello fell into a pulp machine and was swashed around until all they had to do was dry him out, and they could have printed the Sunday Times on him. And then the forward guy says, most people would have stopped there, but Mr. Benchley continues to write, in fact, that is just what they did do. And it was one of the best editions of the Sunday Times ever run off the presses because it had human interest. And it's so funny because this is written almost 100 years ago. 100 years ago, the stuff I read from 100 years ago isn't funny. Because of course, humor changes. And this stuff is lasting.
In all fairness, a lot of the Robert Benchley now, you read it now, and it's hard to get. He has a lot of references, which is again something I learned from Robert Benchley.
Yeah.
Is that if you are into humor, if you were going to make that your career, you have to realize you have a shelf life.
Yeah.
And it may last longer with some people than others, but much of Robert Benchley is kind of inaccessible to a lot of people today.
We don't even watch the first few seasons of South Park because we don't think they're funny. Or the last few seasons of The Simpsons. We're like, even the modern funny stuff, we're like, that's not funny anymore, right?
Yeah, you have to accept that. The other thing about Benchley that always impressed me, he was, in addition to being the funniest writer of his age by acclaim, he was also a really good theater critic. He lived in New York, covered the theater quite seriously, very erudite guy, went to Harvard, knew everybody, read everything. So he's a very sharp, well-educated man, and still chose in the end, what he really wanted to do was be silly. So
that's a really good observation. You also said the phrase, you said silly a few times, and I've heard you say once in the past, Dave, on a different interview, I hope I'm not misquoting you, he had the confidence to be silly, or the courage to be silly. We look around today. Can you just explain what you mean by that, the courage to be silly?
Yeah, if you look at how people write humor, most humor, and I speak as a person who has been over the years, been inundated with humor written by people who want to write humor.
Of course. You've been called the funniest man in America by the New York Times. You're going to get humor sent to you.
And if anybody would know, it'd be the New York Times. But anyway, the most humor is really derivative. You see something you like, and you want to write like that, and you want to write to the audience that person wrote to, and you want to appeal to that audience. So you're going to write something that's familiar to them.
There's a wink.
Yeah, the impulse to do that, to conform in humor, weirdly enough, is very powerful. Like you write a joke today about Donald Trump, it has to basically be of the format, Donald Trump's an idiot.
Right.
If you don't write it that way, then you're not, one of the cool kids, and I'm not knocking that. I think he's an idiot, but
no, you're saying the joke's too obvious.
As humor,
yeah.
It's then every now and then somebody comes along like Robert Benchley, who doesn't care what other people think is funny, doesn't care what other people are doing, doesn't care. He just trusts that his audience is going to go with him wherever he chooses to go. And that's a rare quality. And when it happens, you go, wow, that's fantastic. Like when Steve Martin first came along, when he first did his stand-up act and put an arrow through his head and stuff like that was silly, gutsy silly, and it worked. He was unbelievably successful with that because I think he was so willing to be so different.
Thank you so much to Dave Barry. The courage to be silly, the courage to be different, rare these days. But just like as Dave said, trusting that an audience is going to go with you wherever you're willing to go. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm trying really hard to do those things with 3 books, to be silly, to be different, to just be a little bit outlandish, to publish on the lunar calendar, to decide to go no ads, even though that's huge profit off the table. It's just like the show I want to listen to doesn't have 10 minutes of ads. I don't want to have ads. And being a little bit silly and different, right? Like when I released chapter 7 with Vishwas Agrawal, I could have gone one of 2 ways, and it went the good way, where it went viral and everyone's been writing letters and sort of giving us phone calls about it. And Vish himself has called back. It's like that encourages me and encourages us on the show to keep taking more risks. And we have so many shows planned in 2019 that I got them on the tip of my tongue. I just want to tell you all about them because I'm so excited. But just what I'm trying to say is just stay with me. Please come where I'm going because it's going to be somewhere fun. Okay. Now, let's jump back. Chapter 10 with Ilan Mastai. Ilan Mastai, we go into his living room in downtown Toronto with his dog Ruby Slipper sitting in front of us. Who is Ilan? Well, he's an award-winning filmmaker and the best-selling author behind the novel All Our Wrong Todays, which is like an incredible sci-fi book. I highly, highly, highly recommend it. So at this moment in the podcast, we're talking about The Chrysalids by John Wyndham. Wait a minute. Oh no, I did it again. I forgot to summarize Dave Barry's books. Dave, you just gave us number 978, Chips Off the Old Benchley by Robert Benchley. Number 977, Very Good Jeeves by P.J. Woodhouse. And number 976, a very, very funny, hilarious book, The Dog of the South by Charles Portis. I'm going to try really hard not to do that anymore. Now let's come back to Ilan's living room. We're talking about The Chrysalids. That's what tipped me off that I'd missed it, by John Wyndham. And we're talking about how these themes are so universal, about the lengths the intolerant will go to keep themselves pure. And we're remarking on how 70 years later, we're still talking about this book, The Chrysalids, and we talk about how artists go about creating meaningful work that truly lasts. Let's hear Ilan's take now.
Well, look, I think most authors have certain themes, certain ideas that obsess them, and they keep finding different ways of exploring them. I think that you often I find I'll come up with an idea for a story and I'll let it marinate and I'll think it through and I'll decide I'm going to spend some time writing that. And I'll get quite far into it before I realize this is just the same story that I told. The characters are different. The scenario is different. The location's different. Everything's different. Even the writing style is different, but I'm writing the same story.
No way.
Because I just have these themes that I keep coming back to. And I think a lot of authors are like that. And when you actually kind of go deep, beyond the prose, beyond the kind of the plot, beyond the sort of specificity of the character, those deep themes are the same. And so, I think that that's in some ways what makes you an author, is you're just obsessed with some idea. And you can't get it. And usually it's not an idea with an immediate obvious answer. And so because it doesn't have an immediate obvious answer, you keep picking at it. It's like a wound inside you, and you don't want it to scab over. You just keep kind of peeling back the scab and kind of poking this is a gross metaphor.
No, I'm thinking of poking the tooth that's loose when you're a kid. You are doing that same itchy yes feeling, and I know exactly what you're talking about.
And I think part of being an author is with the tooth never comes out. It's just wiggly forever. That's probably what makes you an author, is that you have something in you, this kind of emotional or philosophical tooth, that it will never be steady again, but it will also never fall out. It'll just be wiggly for the rest of your life, and that's why you write.
Why doesn't it fall out? Can you not close a theme off in your work and have some mental closure because you extricate it from your mind in this? Can you not? Or are you thinking that these...
I mean, I can't speak for everybody.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why you stopped writing. Why did Harper Lee stop writing? Well, maybe she...
Done. Finished. Got
she wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. The tooth fell out.
Mic drop.
Yeah. Look, I mean... or Salinger, maybe, he wrote a couple masterpieces, and then he was like, I said what I had to say.
Catcher in the Rye, a couple things.
Franny and Zoe.
Stopped writing.
Seymour introduction.
And I don't know the full story, but yeah.
I mean, so maybe there are authors who have that wiggly tooth and it comes out.
The longer you have a wiggly tooth, not to push the metaphor too far, the longer you're able to create the art that reflects it, that articulates to yourself. Like that's kind of a beautiful thing, is that it's a documented form of pain, like minor pain inside you.
Unless it gets infected and kills you. Which can happen. I don't want to scare everybody, but you should, if you have not, it's really important to visit your dentist, and you should get that looked at.
There's another metaphor, and who's the dentist for the author? But we'll maybe park that one.
It is a question, though, that I think a lot of authors probably ask themselves, which is, if the wound heals, will I still have anything to say?
Thank you so much to the gracious, intelligent, thoughtful, inspiring Ilan Mastai. I love that metaphor of the wiggly tooth. I have thought about that so many times since that conversation. And I've asked myself, like, which wiggly tooth do I have in my life? And do I have enough of them, frankly? Do I have enough of sort of these penetrating artistic questions that I want to kind of keep probing and provoking and kind of wiggling, I guess? One of them, of course, would have to be, what are the 1,000 most formative books in the world? That question is going to take us 15 years to answer, and we are on that journey now. Ilan just gave us, see, I'm not going to forget this time, he gave us number 975, The Chrysalids by John Wyndham. He gave us number 974, One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Did I do it? Did I say his last name right? For those that listened to that entire chapter, I really messed it up a lot. And number 973, Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. A book I desperately wanted to love and just could not get through. So no book shame, no book guilt. That was my story. So we go from a novelist now, Ilan, over to an editor, Carrie Colin, one of the most preeminent editors in the world. She edited million-copy bestsellers like A Stolen Life by J.C. Dugard, the book Lion, which you probably know was basis of that movie, which if you haven't seen was wonderful, Lion, and #Girlboss by Sophia Amoruso. Are you supposed to say the hashtag? I don't know. I think so. #Girlboss. And she also edited The Happiness Equation, my own book. But that's not why I picked her. I picked her because of the other ones. I was able to reach out to her and ask her because I knew her from The Happiness Equation. So I fly down to her home in Washington, D.C. She invites me into essentially her book room upstairs in her house, which we get to talk about at the beginning. And we're talking about The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis and how it relates to this theme of escapism and power for children. Let's listen in.
And I just thought the idea, and this is going to sound so silly, but I had an armoire in my room that I pictured was the wardrobe. I mean, it looked like there are some illustrations in the book. Yeah. And this armoire in my room looked like the wardrobe. Wow. So the idea that if I wanted to escape into my armoire, into another world, that I could, was so wonderful.
It's so funny because there's so many books about escapism, but very few involve walking into something that's in everybody's house, like a closet, like an armoire. It's usually go down a rabbit hole, something you couldn't actually do.
Well, and interestingly enough, I was a very fearful kid. So before bed, all the closet doors had to be really shut tight. I had to have lights on. I didn't like to sleep next to a window. And a little secret, which is now no longer a secret because it's going to be on your podcast, is that I still am that way. I don't like to sleep near closet doors. I don't like to sleep near windows. I find it a little scary. So even if I'm on the 30th floor of a building, I find it scary. It's ridiculous. But so it's interesting that this book was almost anomalous for me in the fact that it didn't feel scary. It felt exciting. And of course, I knew I couldn't go into my armoire and be in Narnia. But the idea of it was great. And the idea that you're going into something and the siblings and the kids in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, they go in voluntarily. They don't get sucked in. Nobody comes and steals them and pulls them in. So it's not scary in that way for young children. It's very voluntary. They go and they fall into this world.
They push through the clothes hanging at the back, and then suddenly they feel sort of coldness below their feet, and then That's right.
It's kind of dark, and then they see the lamppost that guides them.
But to your point, they can take one step backwards and be back in the wardrobe.
Well, and there's a lot, and throughout the book, there's a lot of directionality. There's a lot of navigation. So they're always reminding themselves how to get back to places. They're being mindful about how they got to places rather than just kind of, it's a little bit of The Wizard of Oz is like that too. Like she always knows that the yellow brick road will take her one way. And it's similar in that sense, in that there's a path to get everywhere and they don't ever get sucked too far in that it felt really scary. So I can be scared easily.
Well, and can we go into that a little bit? So why was that so appealing to you as a child? You can get scared easily. Many of us can. You said it's ridiculous. I don't necessarily think it's ridiculous. I think a lot of us have so many things like that to this day. My parents both sleep with nightlights. You know what I mean?
I like a nightlight.
You like a good nightlight here and there. But why was the idea of disappearing, going into a foreign land with an evil witch appealing? It seems like that would amplify fears, not.
But the kids felt so empowered there, and they were empowered. They were told that they're this other species, that they're, the sons of Adam, the sons of Eve, that they're human, and so they're special. And I think that they felt empowered there, and they felt like they were helping. They wanted to. They wanted to help. And I think children are powerless, and they're safe, and it's a good thing that they're well taken care of for the most part, hopefully. And as a child, I certainly was, and I felt cared for and I felt safe, but I certainly wasn't empowered. And so the idea that these kids could go and create change and be powerful, I think is exciting.
Thank you so much to Carrie Colon. I love that theme of children seizing power through books. I mean, can't we all relate? You're solving mysteries, battling bullies, and books just give us more responsibility and experiences than you otherwise would have, right? Like I remember reading Encyclopedia Brown when I was a kid, and like he was way smarter than me, and he solved mysteries, and he like outsmarted bullies with like his mind, and I was like, I could live vicariously through that, and it did give me power. I remember like sort of feeling that way, a little bit more confident at school. Anyway, that's just me. Carrie, you're the best. I'm super lucky I got to work with you on the Happiness Equation, and you're an incredible editor. I love that conversation. Thank you for giving us books number 972, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. Number 971, The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. And we have a super interesting conversation about that and about suicide in general. And number 970, The Diary of Anne Frank by Anne Frank. So where do we go from Washington, D.C.? We go all the way over to New York City. We go to the top of a big high-rise downtown Manhattan. We go into TED headquarters, and we sit down with the man himself, Chris Anderson, the head of TED, the New York Times best-selling author of TED Talks, the sort of like the super altruistic champion of spreading knowledge and information around the world. I mean, this guy is the head of the largest thought leadership collective on the planet. TED has made and shaped and influenced so many lives, including my own. There was a ton to choose from in this conversation: the state of the planet, the future of our species, the power of knowledge. But I'm just going to go a little bit sideways here, because we talk about so many big ideas, and that's what TED does so well, and that's what Chris does so well. And we know him as the head of TED, but I also was lucky enough to just sort of, I guess, in a way, touch a bit about his heart and his relationship with Jacqueline Novogratz, who wrote this book, The Blue Sweater, which he picked on for the list. Which this book, I know it sounds kind of sneaky, but actually this book totally changed and affected his life in many ways, including him eventually marrying the author of it. So Jacqueline Novogratz is the CEO of Acumen Fund, often called the largest fund around the world for nonprofits and charities. And he kindly and gently let me ask him and probe a little bit about their relationship. So there's so many because there's so many relationships like this now, right? Where both people in the relationship are working big jobs or doing big and interesting things. And I wanted to get into his thoughts about how to balance that. And so let's hear what Chris Anderson, head of TED Talk says. Clearly I shouldn't be giving a TED Talk about his relationship with his wife, Jacqueline Novogratz. Can you comment a little bit to help us? How do you work with a spouse? Where do you find balance on what to keep separate, what to put together? For those of us who are in relationships and are navigating this world where we get to do so many things together and separate, what advice do you have for us on how we align those things? And what does that look like in the household? I mean, to the extent you're comfortable sharing, I'd love for you to just open that up for us, for us a bit.
I mean, I think every couple is different, and so I'd be really hesitant to try and offer guidelines that anyone could or should use.
So once the hesitation's gone, now tell us what to do.
I mainly view myself as just really lucky. Like I think it's. I think most couples probably shouldn't work together. Like I really think it's, and in fact, we don't work together on that many things. We learn from each other, we encourage each other, but we have different sort of domains of work.
And why shouldn't?
Because a lot of people who get stuff done are quite controlling. I'm a controlling person, so is Jacqueline, and if you're not careful, you will disagree and fall out and whatever. So it's like trying to find the right space between collaborating and owning a piece of what you do probably matters,
and while empowering each other,
while empowering and being and sort of learning from each other. So look, if you are lucky enough to have a partner who deeply shares your values, who you respect, I mean that is such a gift to be able to at the deepest level believe in each other. That matters for a lot, and I know that not everyone has that, and there are many other ways to make a great relationship. You can have great relationships that are based on playing really well together, sharing a lot of interests, sharing a lot of friends. There's no one way to do it, but wow, if you can find someone where there's just that real deep belief and respect and shared values, and feeling that you're sort of on a shared journey where every day you feel like there's something that you can just feel proud of in the other. That's a real gift. I feel super lucky.
That does feel super lucky. I remember one of the first fights Leslie and I had was like a few months into our relationship. I gave her some card that I'd written us about, like, you complete me. It's two hearts beating as one. Like, I feel like I found my other half. And she was like, what is this? She's like, no, I totally disagree with this philosophically. It's two people making each other better individuals. It's two people looking out in the same way. And she was much more articulate than what I'm saying right now. So she's going to listen to this. But it was like a real big mind shift to me to think the way you're just describing as our work is supporting each other from the base while letting each other shine.
Yes. Yeah. The most important vow I gave to her when we got married was I promise I will not hold you back. And I think I've stuck with that. The fact that she's in a different country most of the time for me is probably evidence of that. But yes, I don't believe in the idea of people getting married and becoming one. I don't believe in that. I think that's in some Christian traditions, that's the sort of the model. I think that's a dangerous model. I think it's better I think your wife had it right.
As do I. I love those thoughts from Chris. Thank you so much, Chris Anderson. He did not have to do this podcast in any way, shape, or form, and he did, because he's a super nice guy. And a super nice guy. He gave us number 969, Enlightenment Now by Steven Pinker. Number 968, The Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch. That was a real head scratcher for me. Not a head scratcher like why do you pick it, but like that was just a book I could not read. It was so hard for me. And number 967, The Blue Sweater by Jacqueline Novogratz. So we'll leave New York, TED headquarters in New York. Where do we go next for the next chapter? Chapter 13, all the way up to Ottawa, Ontario, Canada's capital, where we sit down with Ariel Bessette, one of the world's largest booktubers. What is booktube? Well, we talk about that, but really it's this incredibly fast-growing subset, this community of book lovers, all who have kind of hundreds of thousands and some up to like millions of subscribers on YouTube, right? So this is like a visual tapestry layered across the world of people kind of suggesting and linking and connecting with each other all about their love of reading. So of course, we find one of the world's biggest booktubers in Ariel Bessette. New York Times did a huge feature this summer, which I talk about on the show, all about booktube, and Ariel was one of the people featured on the show and photographed for the image and everything. So we geek out on books a lot in this one and on reading. She talks about, I love how she talks about how getting recognized in Shakespeare in Love was like a mic drop moment for her. That was so funny. And then we start talking about this young adult book. It's called Memoirs of a Teenage Amnesiac. And Ariel talks about something I never thought of before, which is the art and purpose and magic of rereading. And then she explains that why it's maybe the most important purpose of books ever. It's such an interesting concept to me. I never thought about this before. So let's turn it over to Ariel to tell us why.
But I picked this one because it's probably the one I've reread the most, especially when I was a teenager. There's a really distinct difference between my reading before BookTube and after BookTube. So before BookTube, I would go to Chapters. And I say Chapters just because that was always the one nearest my house that I loved. No offense to indie bookshops. I love you too. But I would go to Chapters and I would spend hours in Chapters at the young adult section, getting a bunch of books, sitting down and reading like the first chapter or the first few pages and being like, no, I don't like this. Or, oh yeah, this one's cool. And creating a more selective pile. And then at the end, I would pick like 3 books and I would go home and I would read all those 3 books and then I'd read them again and then I would read them again. I just really loved rereading when I was a teenager.
Why?
I honestly can't pin it down. I loved getting to know characters. I loved feeling, because for me, the first time I read a book or even watch a film is kind of stressful. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if I'm going to be happy with the way that it ends. But the second time that I watch something is so much more relaxed. I'm like, I know how this is going to end. I like the way it ends. I agree with the way it ends, or I disagree, but I know. So I'm like a lot more comfortable reading it. But also I can just get so many more details from it that I couldn't the first time that I read it, and just excitement.
Do you do that today?
No, so this is the interesting thing. So that was the way I read before BookTube. But after BookTube, I learned about so many books that before didn't matter to me because literally my experience was so solitary. It would just be me going to a bookshop, picking 3 books, going home and being satisfied with those 3 books. I didn't know about any other books, right? And I knew that the bookshop had the next time I was going to go. But now because of BookTube, I am constantly made aware of so many new books that rereading has really fallen behind, because I'm like, well, why would I reread a book when I could finally get to this other book and this other book that I wanted to read? But it's actually been an active thing that I've been trying to recorrect because I love rereading.
You want to bring rereading back?
Yes, and I started this book this year by rereading 3 books, and it was the best start to a year ever. It was this resinking into 3 different worlds that I love, right? And that I knew weren't going to disappoint me.
Resinking, rereading.
Yeah.
I love all the re's.
Yes.
And it's about reading.
Redoing. Yeah, it's about reading. You're right.
And are you finding now that you've brought rereading back in?
Reintegrated?
Yeah. Oh, God. Have you recharged yourself?
Yeah. No,
I'm trying to
it's
use
way better. It's because for me, why do we read? Oh my God, huge question. So many reasons. Everyone's got different reasons and they're all valid. One of the reasons I read is to find favorite books so that I can reread them, so that I can have these places, because books are places. When you are reading a book and it's a good book that you like, you are in a new place. Totally. You are, right? You are in a space.
And you are, all the neuroscience agrees with that. You have this area in your visual cortex, area 17, it lights up. You reread the book, that same area of your brain lights up again. And there's a lot of research on specifically fiction and specifically literary fiction, opening these dimensions of our brains and creating things and building things like empathy, compassion,
Right, yeah.
Relatability, all that stuff through the book.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I'm going to look up Area 17. It sounds
You should.
very
I know, it
legit.
sounds like a place UFOs land.
District 17, like in the Hunger Games. But yeah, no, you're in this place. And so one of the reasons that I read is to find those places. It's like, why do we travel? Right? Like, and once you find, like a lot of people, I don't know, they go to Rome and then they go to Rome again and then they go to Rome again. And you're like, why don't you go to a new place? And like, no, I love Rome or wherever, right? You're going to find these places that you love. And I feel this a similar way about reading. I like finding places that I love and then revisiting them.
Thank you so much to the incredible Ariel Bessette. By the way, if you're looking for a booktube channel to start with, try Ariel's. She is really captivating to listen to, as you could tell. She is just fun, and she is bright and sharp and interesting and funny, and you can't pick a better YouTube channel than hers. So jump on over and check her out. Ariel, I love this quote also. I like finding places that I love and revisiting them. You know, there's always been this like metaphor that like books are places, or like you can go to Australia by reading a book that takes place in Australia. But like it's true. In fact, you might get more out of the book because of the description is so deep and powerful than you might get from like a little jaunt over there. Ariel, thank you for giving us number 966, Animal Farm by George Orwell. And I loved our conversation around that book. Number 965, Memoirs of a Teenage Amnesiac by Gabrielle Zevin. And number 964, All We Shall Know by Danal Ryan. Okay, from Ottawa all the way down now to chapter 14 in sunny San Diego, what I've joked and called the heart center of this podcast a few times because I keep getting calls from people down there and visiting people down there. So let's go down to Rich Gibbons down there, the president of Speak Inc., the largest speaking bureau in the entire Western United States. Rich is the former president of the International Association of Speaking Bureau. When it comes to speaking, the business of speaking, kind of like curating like from the gigantic world that we live in, sort of the messages and the thought leaders that the world most needs to hear. This guy is a genius, and he is also super articulate. I can't get enough of just listening to him. Remember how I said earlier that way back, let me see what chapter number it is. In chapter 5, Gretchen Rubin picked the only health book on the podcast, right? Well, Rich picked the only parenting book so far on the podcast. It is called The Blessings of a Skinned Knee by Wendy Mogul. So let's jump right in to our conversation about raising children and parenting. Okay, here we go.
We're not raising children. We're trying to raise human beings to become responsible, personally accountable adults. And a lot of what she talks about in there is drawing on timeless wisdoms that are thousands of years old, but overlaid, in a modern context. And there's ballast around that this is an idea or a concept that has stood the test of time.
Yeah.
And not, weeks and months,
thousands of years,
centuries and centuries of thousands of years. So there's there's an element of sometimes when you read a book in this genre, you feel like you're gyrating with approach du jour that you're constantly, and I read a lot of those where this feels very different from the last book I read, and now this book is contrarian to
cry your baby to sleep, always hold your baby.
There's always some sort of prescription that ends up being running counter to something else that you've read, and there was just something very I want to say ancient. That's not the right word, but they're just something very timeless and a feeling of reliability around this, that these teachings blended with the modern world to approach some of these pesky. I mean, you're a parent too.
What are a couple things you took from the book that you do in your house now? You're a dad. You got 2 teenagers and 1 almost teen. Yeah. Is there anything you can say from formatively, that you do as a father from this book?
Well, the one thing I think there's a lot of work out now around the notion that in modern society, parents have evolved from helicopter parent, hovering over their children, making sure that nothing ill comes of them, to the lawnmower parent. Like, let me get down at the ground level and hack a clean path through the undergrowth so that child doesn't get any scratches or a skinned knee. So the idea that there are lessons to be learned from failure, and there's lessons to be learned from not doing it perfectly, that I think we've been trained to strive for perfection and strive for the perfect outcome. And parenting, obviously, you're a parent, you know that it's very messy business. It's very unpredictable. Your kids can eat the same food. They come from the same genetic material, and they're all completely different.
Totally. It's a great title too, The Blessing of a Skinned Knee. And her follow-up book is called The Blessing of a B-, which is about raising teenagers before college. I thought, Rich, what we could do on this book, because it's such a fascinating book, The Blessing of a Skinned Knee. One of the ones in the book is parents are the boss. Kind of like, your house isn't a democracy. They talk about this couple that came into her counseling, and there's toys everywhere, and like it's kind of like the family takes a vote on everything, and like they decide like, I'm not going to have this for dinner, and like I don't want to go to sleep now, and I want to watch one more show. And she's like, a big thing in this book is, no, parents are the boss, right? Like I'm paraphrasing it. Like that's not the word she uses. Something more polite. But like that was a really good message for me to hear with a kid doing a lot of those things right now.
I have a really good friend, Tim, a very old, dear friend, Tim, who when he was getting some backlash from his kids, and he and his wife were very successful parents, and he was explaining to one of his children from whom he was getting a little bit of pushback, you need to understand this family is a benevolent dictatorship. We want what's best. The message being, we want what's best for you, but we're going to tell you how it is. There's another book where they talk about parents falling into that trap of being desirous of being their son or daughter's friend. And the author says, the last thing in the world your child needs are 2 more really tall friends.
That's hilarious. Benevolent dictatorship. That phrase generated a lot of responses and phone calls and emails from you guys. Thank you so much to the incredible Rich Gibbons. Rich, you know how much I love and I respect you. Thank you so much for doing 3 books. And thank you so much for giving us number 963, The Blessing of a Skinned Knee by Wendy Mogul. Number 962, Nothing to Envy by Barbara Demick. Fascinating portrayal of contemporary life in North Korea. And number 961, On Writing by Stephen King. Maybe the best book on writing out there. I don't know. We can debate that. But Rich would slap me if you hear me say that. Those were the 3 books given to us from Rich Gibbons. Okay, so where do we go from San Diego? Well, we go over to chapter 15 of 3 books in Detroit, Michigan, where we go up to the top of the Fisher Building, the Art Deco building in downtown Detroit, and we sit down in his radio, not his radio station, but at his radio show with the one and only Mitch Albom. Okay, so Mitch Albom is most famous for being the author of the best-selling memoir of all time, Tuesdays with Morrie. Also wrote The 5 People You Meet in Heaven, and his newest book is The Next Person You Meet in Heaven, which, by the way, mere days after chapter 15 of 3 books came out, shot immediately to number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list. Coincidence? Maybe. But either way, we did release this chapter at the same week that Mitch's new book came out, this great new book. And in this little snippet, we're talking about the book Gilead by Mary Lynn Robinson. And Mitch is reflecting on, what comes after you find purpose and what comes after you find style in life. What is that thing and how do we search for it? Okay, Mitch, over to you.
I also wrote a book about faith called Have a Little Faith. I've spent a lot of my time, as you've noted, with this orphanage in Haiti. It's a Christian orphanage, and I'm not Christian myself, but I mean the faith element of their lives in Haiti and of these orphans and of the poor people is very important to me. And I've become a much more spiritual person as I've gotten older. And so to read a character who can speak so beautifully about life, but mixes in, God and isn't ashamed of it. I don't even know if today, people would be critical of Gilead because it is based on, a preacher's view of the world, but I just think it's gorgeous. And it showed me that there is something you can always aspire to in your writing, and that is beauty. Once you find purpose, once you find style, and I think I've done all that, what's left is beauty. And you're never going to reach the end of that path. You can keep trying to write in a way that's more beautiful. And as I've gotten older, I think I've been blessed to do that. Now, I'm nowhere near on her level or many other writers' level, so it's all relative. But relative to the way I wrote when I was younger, I'm learning how to say things in succinct and more beautiful fashion. There's a passage where I wish I had the page in front of me, but he basically is just describing. He's describing a young couple laughing underneath a tree where the raindrops are coming off of the tree, and how beautiful the sound of laughter is. And at the end of the paragraph, it's just beautiful, descriptive. He just says something like, "Oh, comma, this life, this world." So simple. And yet, you feel, here's this old man looking back. And as I get older, that's how I feel about the world, just, oh, this world, this life. It astonishes me. There's so much beauty in it and so many things that, with children and particularly, and because that book is written to a child, and I've had a lot of contact with children in my later years, and they become more and more part of my life running this orphanage. And we had a child that one of the kids we brought up became our daughter for several years. She died of a brain tumor, but the 2 years that we had her living with us as our little girl were the most formative and significant years of my life. And so much of her joy and spirit, her name was Chica. I'm going to do a book about her next after the one that comes out this year. And I found myself always with her saying, oh, this world, this life, oh, this child. And she was just here for 7 years on earth, and, she died so young. So that book, Gilead, not only when I first read it, but every time I continue to read it, shows me the possibilities of writing. And if I could ever create a page that to me is as beautiful as this book, I would be happy.
Once you find purpose and once you find style, what's left is beauty. Mitch Albom, very wise words. And I love how he also adds in, you're never going to reach the end of that path. But as we go into a new year and we reflect on this last one, I like that thought. It's like, well, what in my life and what in your life do you already have purpose about? Do you have purpose around your career, around where you live, around what you do with your time and your energies? Do you have purpose? If so, then can you find style? What a great outgrowth from purpose. It's like, can you do it with pizzazz? Can you do so, like with the flick of a wrist, with a little rhythm, with a little movement? Can you do it your way? And if you get those two things done in your art or your craft or the thing you're making or doing the most in your life, then can you find beauty? Can you become a beautiful teacher? Can you become a beautiful cashier? Can you become a beautiful Uber driver like Vishwas Agrawal? Can you become a beautiful writer? Can you become a beautiful person in the world? And I think that's a great path that Mitch sort of sets us all down. Thank you so much to the very kind and gracious Mitch Albom for giving us number 960, The Royal Road to Romance by Richard Halliburton. Number 959, The Right Stuff by Tom Wolfe, the first Tom Wolfe book on this list. Maybe the last, maybe not the last. We'll see if anyone else picks Tom Wolfe. And number 958, Gilead by Mary Lynn Robinson. Okay, I was just kidding with that Tom Wolfe tease. I know a Tom Wolfe book is coming in 2019 because someone's just picked it. I won't tell you which one it is, though. So would that be our first time having the same author twice on a list? It might be. We'll see if that turns out that way. And number 958, of course, was, like I just said, Gilead by Mary Lynn Robinson. Okay, that's chapter 15 in Detroit. Now, chapter 16, we're going to go back down to Coral Gables, Florida, sitting down in one of our favorite bookstores in the world, the incredible Books and Books, where Mitchell Kaplan is the owner, operator, chief curator, head bookseller. This guy's amazing. He's a phenom. He's a Yoda. He runs 600 author events a year. That's almost 2 a night. He's the founder of the Miami art fair, which is like bringing like 400,000 or 500,000 people into Miami every year out of Miami-Dade College. And he runs this little chain of independent bookstores called Books and Books. We already went down to Judy Blume's bookstore down in Key West, Florida for chapter 6 of the show. And now, we also went and spent some time in Books and Books for which chapter was it? Chapter 9 of the show with Dave Barry. And now here we are in chapter 16 of the show, spending even more time in Books and Books. And by the way, I also give our show props for every show that we record in a bookstore, right? Like we did Sarah Ramsey's in Book City. Hopefully we can do a book episode in like the Strand and in Book People and in Tattered Cover and Shakespeare and Company. I got dreams. I hope we can do it. So Mitchell is awesome. Mitchell and I are talking about his third book at this time. It is Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman. And he says he goes on a rant. I think it's just beautiful how he talks about how we can fix and heal so much of the ills that we have in our education system today. I am the son of a teacher. I am the husband of a teacher. So I was just like lapping up what he was putting down. Here we go. Here's Mitchell Kaplan on fixing the education system. So say it's right. Now what? Now do we...
You want me to come up with an answer?
I want you to come up with an answer. Yes, I do. Because you have a lot of sage wisdom. You're voted one of, I believe, America's top bookseller, if I'm right.
Right. That just means I persevere.
No, but
what do we do? What do we do?
What do we do about it?
What do we do about it? That's a really good question. The name of Jonathan Kozol's book, it was called Death at an Early Age.
Okay.
And it was about basically the ineptitude of our educational system back in the 70s. And maybe that's really what we do about it. What we need to do is make sure that people, that we value education more than we value it today.
How?
And, well, you can start by...
You're wagging your glasses at me as you say, no, I like that. I just want to give people the visual.
You can start by acknowledging that the teaching profession is an extremely important one. And you can start by paying people more who teach and encourage young people who are bright and interested to go into teaching. You can start by giving public schools the money it needs, the public schools the money they need in order to have enough desks, enough books, enough, the classroom need to be rich and full. And
maybe less technology.
Maybe
debate,
not.
Right? It's a debate right now.
Technology could work. I don't think it's a matter. I really don't. I think a lot of those things are out of the box. In other words, I don't think you're going to put technology back in a box. Mm-hmm. I think it's the way we deal with it. It's the way it's not being able. We need civic discourse that is smart, that people understand what's going on, and all of that. And actually, what I tell people is, and it's not just because from where I sit, but we have to really develop a generation of critical thinkers and critical readers. We have to really encourage the next generation of readers as much as we possibly can. And the way you do that is by just giving as much support as you can to that. As much as we give to, I don't know, the military, or as much as we give to anything else that, we tend to support wrongheadedly. We don't need to give big tax cuts to people so that they can acquire more companies or more things or more homes or more cars. We need to be able to redirect our resources in such a way as to allow people to eat, give them comfortable housing, let them nourish their soul and their brain and their minds. I think I went on a rant.
There's nothing wrong with a good rant, Mitchell. Thank you so much for your grace and your authenticity and your wisdom in chapter 16 of 3 books. And thank you so much for giving us number 957, Black Like Me by John Howard Griffin. Number 956, The Dharma Bums by Jack Kerouac. Number 955, Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman. And now we're going to go over to the western side of North America. We got to start branching outside of North America in 2019 and 2020, okay? So far we haven't done that, but we will. But for now, we're going to go to Del Mar, California, just north of San Diego, where we meet up with the incredible Emily McDowell. Who is Emily McDowell? She runs Emily McDowell Studios, and I feel, as do millions of other people, that she's putting her finger on an incredible gap in the sort of emotional communications world, and she is able to describe the relationships we have, not the relationships we want to have, through an incredible collection of greeting cards and tote bags and all kinds of things that you can buy and give and send to people. And I love it. I really think it's incredible, emotionally intelligent and beautiful, beautiful work, which is why I reached out to her to do 3 books. And so we sit down in Del Mar and we start talking about one of her books, which is The Liars Club by Mary Karr. And the conversation takes a very interesting turn.
One of the things that this book is sort of credited with doing is kickstarting the sort of modern memoir movement.
3 M's.
Meaning,
that was
fourth M, memoirs written by people who are not famous, like written for the story and not like a biography. Right? Like you're not Eleanor Roosevelt talking about the White House.
Lee Iacocca talking about Chrysler.
You're just like a lady from Texas talking about her crazy childhood. Right. And for me, so I came from kind of a crazy childhood, not like Mary Karr's childhood was, very differently crazy, but mine was not easy. And it was, my parents had split up when I was young, not much of a relationship with my dad, difficult relationship with my mom. And I really felt, I didn't understand when I went off to college and I left, I went to Minnesota for school and I grew up in Boston, and there was definitely like an element of like, get me out of here. I'm just going to go far away and be a person, an adult by myself over here. And I had not really, up until this point, seen somebody transform pain into humor in the same way, in a way that I resonated with so much as a person. And it felt to me like it was like an illustration of like, oh, like you could do this, not necessarily like you can write this beautifully or you can, but this is like a thing. So here is this woman who had this crazy childhood and like, look what she did with it. And there are things to learn from it and there are things to share and there's ways to talk about it. And like, it sort of blew open for me this idea of turning pain and life experience into art, for lack of a better term, art. I'm using art. I'm not saying my work is art, but I'm saying that was what it meant for me.
And your work, I think your work is art.
Well, thank you.
Totally beautiful art.
Questionable, but
no, I see the groceries and shit bag, and it's beautiful.
Groceries and shit bag, man, that is like.
I think it really is art. I genuinely mean that. So keep going. So in the story, Mary Karr has, her mother's been married, I think something like 7 times, including twice to her father.
Right.
There's some violence in the book. There is some trauma, and you saw some parallels.
Yeah, and again, it's not as intense as what she describes in this book. But my mom really suffered with depression, and was a single mom, and she was an artist, and she just really had a hard time being a mom. And my parents split up when I was 5, and he was not a huge part of our lives. And my sister and I actually used to joke that he wasn't our biological father, because he was like an alien. Like he was like, we couldn't figure out, you couldn't draw a line between him and us. The way that my mom, with all of the stuff that she was, you could still draw a very clear line between her and us. And that just wasn't the case with my dad. And then we ended up finding out later, much, much later, like college age, that he wasn't our biological father, that my mom was inseminated as part of a pilot program through Harvard Medical School, through her OBGYN at the time in Cambridge. Wow. And it was before they kept any records. Like it was like before that you could pay to do it. It was just like a thing that they were trying to figure out, like if it worked. And so nobody was like writing it down.
You mean there was no...
No, like there was no like, hey, we're going to like just write the name of the guy whose sperm it is down. Like they didn't do that.
Harvard did not do that.
Harvard did not do that.
Because artificial insemination was not a thing yet?
It wasn't there was no laws about it, right? And so, but you would think like common sense would be like, we're going to make people. So maybe we should just like keep track of this a little bit because we might want this information like someday in the future.
Sorry, can you do a 30-second on, so what era was this at Harvard Medical School they were doing this?
This was the mid-70s.
So mid-70s, Harvard Medical School piloting a version of artificial insemination?
Yes.
And your mom volunteered to be part of the study group?
Yes. So my parents had tried to have kids for a long time, weren't able to, and they thought it was her for, 8 years, and finally tested my dad, and it turned out my dad couldn't father children. And so my mom, in order to have children, she just had, they both went to MIT, they met at MIT, and so they were in Cambridge, and her doctor was just part of this Harvard Medical School network. And so my mom volunteered to be, kind of a guinea pig in this experimentation that they were doing, because they were doing it successfully.
Wow. Thank you so much to Emily McDowell for sharing that story. And it's just a snippet here. I was debating putting the whole thing, but it gets to like 10 or 15 minutes long. We go into much more depth and detail about kind of what happened, what the implications are. How this book, The Liars Club by Mary Karr, that motivated Emily. She talks a little bit about, already you heard about, it's like how do we use pain to sort of create and put that into our art. Emily is so authentic, so able to articulate all these things inside us that most of us can't. And I really appreciate her opening up in such a vulnerable way in this conversation on 3 books. And like, what an amazing power of books, right? That we can use a book like The Liars Club by Mary Karr as a springboard into having this bigger conversation about family and about pain and art and all the sort of interplay between those parts. So, Emily, thank you very much for giving us number 954, the aforementioned Liars Club by Mary Karr. Number 953, Bird by Anne Lamott, probably duking it out with On Writing by Stephen King for one of the best writing books of all time. And number 952, The Book of Shrigley by David Shrigley. Maybe one of the most surprising books yet included on the top 1,000, but a very, very interesting conversation, again, about art around that one. So, okay, where are we here? We just finished chapter 17 in Del Mar. Now we're going to come all the way back up to Toronto for chapter 18, where I'm going to jump into the back of David Sedaris' limo, spend a couple hours with him on the book tour for Calypso. If you don't know David Sedaris, he's one of the, I think he may be the best-selling humorist in the world right now. He's written over 40 articles for The New Yorker, best-selling book after best-selling book. Things like Naked, Me Talk Pretty One Day, Dress Your Family in Corduroy and Denim, and his most recent one, Calypso, which is an incredible book. If you haven't read it, please check it out. We jump into the car with David, and we start talking about kind of like the sort of why we do the things we do. Okay, why do we do the things we do? Why does he tour so strenuously, like a rock star, every spring, every fall? He starts talking about why. We get into a really interesting conversation. Let's listen in. How do you decide kind of how hard to go?
Well, I mean, I used to feel bad about this, but I don't anymore. But like a writer like Joy Williams, she's just more like a pure writer, I think. She doesn't need to represent her work. She'll just put the words on paper and then people can read them, and that's enough. But I like the show business aspect. I always did. I always wanted to. I like getting in front of people. I like the attention. I love the attention. It's just part, and I used to feel bad about that, but I don't anymore. I mean, I feel like it's all part of it for me. Like if I lost my voice and I could never speak again, I think I would still write, but I think it would definitely affect my enthusiasm for it. Because I like writing something and then wondering how it's going to go over, and then I read it out loud and then go and rewrite it and read it and rewrite it. And it's part of how I work. And in terms of going on tour, I like it.
Why?
I like being in airports. I like being in hotels. I like
What can I ask?
meeting strangers.
A lot of people don't say the opposite of airports and hotels and traveling a lot. And I love that you love it, and I actually love it too. hard with a young family, but I do love the areas where I travel because I find it very stimulating. And why do you love the attention so much? And what does it give you? That you
I mean, obviously, I have some hole in my life. You know what I mean? I mean, it's the same way that, that actors or comedians have some deep hole. They're neediness that, they need to be adored and they need to be approved of. And, it's just naked almost, this pathetic need. But, but I've got it.
But why did you say pathetic, though? Why did you have
there's
that
something
scripture?
sad about. I mean, there is something pathetic about it. You're just standing in front of people and you're saying, "Love me, please love me."
And you're not going to come at it from the opposite perspective and say, "I do it because you know what." Because I feel this way as a fan of yours. Like I feel like it's a gift to us. Like you're going tonight. It's as you said when Tobias Wolfe came by, totally free. You can walk into this bookstore tonight. Here's one of your favorite writers, if you like David Sedaris, or maybe you haven't heard of him. Maybe you just heard about him on the radio show. So you go curiously to check him out. You're tipped off into an interesting book. You get to hear him talk about it. You wait in line, you meet him. All for that's arguably all free. So do you not see it from that side at all? That it's something that you're doing for people as well as for yourself?
It seems kind of conceited to think, "Oh, I'm doing this for anyone but myself." Do you know what I mean? That seems
kind of like the easier answer.
Well, I mean, that's sort of like I've been in a situation before where someone says, well, they need you more than you need me. And I don't like to think of things that way. It just doesn't seem healthy to think of anything like that, to think who needs who more. But I would say I don't know. I feel like going to this bookstore tonight, I feel like I need them more than they need me.
Wow, that was intense and beautiful and so classic David Sedaris, where he's just being so authentic and vulnerable and open. I love that conversation. It was a real treat to sit down with David Sedaris and talk about his 3 most formative books, which were number 951, Will You Please Be Quiet, Please, by Raymond Carver. Number 950, Taking Care by Joy Williams, which provoked the conversation we just had. And number 949, In the Garden of the North American Martyrs by Tobias Wolfe. One more chapter to go. Chapter 19, the final chapter we have released on 3 books in 2018. Remember, this is a 333 long chapter journey, and we only did 19. So what do we got left? Oh, here comes some Vishwas Agrawal, Neil Pasricha math again. 333 minus 19 is 314. We got 314 chapters to go. Okay. But before we do, let's get into chapter 19 of this show. We go to Vancouver. We sit down with Chip Wilson, the founder of Lululemon. This guy is so fascinating and so interesting, so almost mercurial. He founded Lululemon. He was the CEO, and then there's sort of like this dramatic kind of change of the guard where he leaves Lululemon, and then he comes back and he still comments on it today. But he really built the thing. He built this gigantic global $1 billion brand. He's one of the richest men in the world today, and we sit down and we have a little chat. So let's jump right into the conversation with Chip Wilson, founder of Lululemon.
When I stopped complaining is when I had access to be responsible to do something about the situation. So I have a thing where if I complain twice about something, then either I take action or I shut up about it.
Wow. If I complain twice about anything, I take action or I shut up.
Right.
And how do you hold yourself to that level of discipline? I'm cranky every time I kind of wake up after a bad night's sleep. How do I? No, I'm just saying, how do you hold your mind so strongly in that place?
Well, I do know if I complain more than twice, people are pretending to listen to me, but they're not listening to me anymore.
It's not effective.
I know I don't listen to people after they complain about something twice, but I start to listen to people if they go, this is what I'm complaining about, and this is what I'm going to do about it, and this is the time I'm going to do it by. And then you go, man, that's a powerful person that's going to get things done in their life.
Did you do anything to grow that strength in your mind? Like I'm hearing a lot of amazing systematic thinking in your brain. I'm sure it's a huge reason why you're so successful. I know people would rather buy a jacket than invest in their mind. And I know maybe it's getting at the landmark, but like, what do you do to grow those muscles up here? I'm tapping my head for those who can't see me. How do you grow that thing? You're a physical guy. I heard you say you go into the gym 3 times a day. I went to the gym this morning. I did some swimming. What are the laps? What are the workouts I should be doing up here?
Well, to give some foundation to that, when I was 18, working in the Alaska oil pipeline and doing my drugs and drinking and being a teenage boy type of thing, but I was an athlete before, like a Canadian swimming team athlete. So my mom sent me an article by Art Bushwald, and it said that that the brain works exactly the same way as the body. Like, you have to train the body to be great. And I was doing like four hours of training a day, and I knew I could actually feel and be the results. And again, it was metrics. I worked hard. My swimming times lowered. I could see the results of it. So then to kind of think, like the brain works the same way. So I actually have to train the brain in the same way I train my body. So that is when, as I kind of go back, I spent the rest of that year, I read 100 books that year at the age of 19. So I think I was probably the best read 19-year-old in the world.
You probably were.
Yeah.
You probably were. Amazing. Wise words from the incredible Chip Wilson, founder of Lululemon. I love this sort of rigid, logical response to this internal dialogue of complaining that we all do. Kind of reminds me of like a swear jar or like something like that. Where it's like, well, if I complain more than twice, no one cares. No one's listening. And if I have a what am I going to do date by when am I going to do it, then it solves itself. It's like, man, like that. You make it sound real simple, Chip. I love the sort of mental strength. And this guy's got massive mental strength to be able to hold ourselves to these types of systems. I'm not a fan, by the way, of New Year's resolutions. I just think that, we never rise to the level of our goals. We always fall to the level of our systems. That is a takeoff of like a Stoic philosophy quote from 2,000 years ago. But it's true. And so what systems can we put in place as we look into the next year to make sure that our lives are as rich and fulfilling as possible? Thank you so much to Chip Wilson for giving us number 948, Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, number 947, The Psychology of Achievement by Brian Tracy, and number 946, Good to Great by Jim Collins. And so how are we going to wrap up this first ever end of the year special podcast chapter? Well, I'll tell you what we're not going to do. We're not going to do our usual kind of packaged close where we have the end of the podcast club. And if you don't know what that is, you got to listen to every other chapter. We have the special club. You call me, I call you. We talk to each other. We read reviews. We talk about the word of the chapter. We do all this fun stuff. I'd love you to leave me responses on this show, but we won't play responses on this show. So if you do have a reaction, a reflection, a moment that stuck out, maybe a moment that stuck out to you that we didn't play, let me know. Give me a call. It's 1-833-READ-A-LOT. Again, it's 1-833-READ-A-LOT, READALOT. Call me. I'd love listening to your messages, and we will play them. We will play some on future chapters. So if we're not going to do our usual close, how are we going to close this show? Well, I'll tell you how we're going to do it. We're going to go all the way back to chapter 1 in the basement of my home with my wife, Leslie. Later in that episode, which you didn't hear yet so far, is where she actually recites a poem by Shel Silverstein from, indeed, book number 1000, Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shel Silverstein. And so let's cut over to that final chapter for Leslie to send us a close. I picked this poem out in this little segment because I think it's a really nice bookend on the best of chapter, but also because it's a nice little reflective piece and a piece of inspiration for all of us to remember as we look into the year ahead. And before I go, I just want to remind everyone, we're only down to number 946. We still have, 945 books to go. I look forward to our pilgrimage together. Now over to Leslie to close us off. Maybe I should ask you if you can think of a formative book. As a test, we'll do a little test.
Just one?
We'll start with one.
Well, the first one that comes to mind is Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shel Silverstein. those poems were just like, I just remember so vividly lying in my bed at the house that I picture where I grew up, and my mom or dad lying next to me. And like, I can remember exactly what the quality of light was in the room, and like the sound of my sisters being put to bed at the same time. And one of them just reading those poems to me and me asking questions about what they meant, and kind of imagining this vivid world that Shel Silverstein had portrayed. And some of them were so silly and funny, and then others were like very poignant and kind of emotionally directive about how to live a good life or what really mattered. And I read one of them at my cousin's like naming ceremony.
Oh yeah?
Yeah. At Devin's naming ceremony. And do you want me to read it? Do you want me to say it to you?
You have it memorized?
Yeah, I still remember it. Because I had it memorized when I was like 12 to say it at the ceremony.
Okay.
It goes, listen to the mustn'ts, child. Listen to the don'ts. Listen to the shouldn'ts, the impossibles, the won'ts. Listen to the never haves, then listen close to me. Anything can happen, child. Anything can be.